Alright, welcome to challenge number 2. In this challenge, we want to create a function that will accept a number and check whether or not it is even. And so as before, I encourage you to pause the video, try it out yourself, and if you get stuck or if you want to check your solution, you can then continue watching the video. So before we actually get to writing the algorithm itself, I want to introduce you to something called the modulo operator, or more simply, the mod operator, for those of you who may not be familiar with it. Now, this is a pretty powerful operator in most programming languages that basically returns the remainder of a division. So if you had two numbers and you said A divided by B, then we would actually get the result of whatever A divided by B was. But if we do A mod B, then the program is still going to perform the division, but instead of returning the result, it's going to return the remainder. So whatever remainder is left over. So for an example, if we console.log, 17 mod 3, and we run that piece of code, down here we're going to see the value 2, and that's because 17 divided by 3 will leave a remainder of 2. And if we do console.log 8 mod 2, then we get a value of 0. And that's expected, right? Because 2 goes into 8 pretty evenly. There is no remainder after that division. And if we do something like console.log -3 mod 2, then we get a value of -1. So now that we understand the modulo operator, we can kind of see how it's going to be helpful in writing this function. We want to go through any number and check to see if the remainder of a division will yield 0 or something else. So in JavaScript, we can declare functions, or we can create functions using the function keyword. I'm just going to call this function isEven, and it's going to have one parameter I'll just call x, which is going to accept the argument that we pass to it. And in this function, I want to write a conditional statement saying if x mod 2 is equal to 0, then I want you to console.log x is even. So what this is going to do is that this function is going to take any number that we pass to it, and it's going to divide that by 2. And if the remainder of that division is equal to 0, then we know that x is an even number. If it's not, then we can write an else statement and say console.log x is not even. Sorry. Great, so let's actually run a few test cases to see if that will work. So I'm going to call isEven, and I'm going to pass to it the argument 4. So we know that 4 is even, so we're just testing to make sure that our function that we wrote isEven will determine if 4 is even or not. So let's go ahead and run it. And you can see here that the function does return 4 is even, or it writes to the console, 4 is even. Let's try another test case. Is even, 7. 7 we know is not even, so it should return 7 is not even. Sorry. So that works. And that's because when we pass in 7 here, it's going to divide 7 by 2. And we know 2 goes into 7 3 times with a remainder of 1. And it's checking to see if 1 is equal to 0. We know that's false, so it's not going to perform, or it's not going to execute this line here on line 13. Instead, it's going to print out, sorry, x is not even, or 7 is not even. So now let's try something like this, 0. Why don't you predict what's going to happen, or what is going to display in the console when we run this line of code, or this call to the function? So when I ran it, I got 0 is even, and this is correct. So 0 is one of those numbers that some people think is even, or it's not even, or it's something else entirely by itself. But by definition, a number is even when it leaves no remainder when divided by 2. And so when we take 0 and divide it by 2, we get no remainder. And therefore, our program is going to write to the console, yes, 0 is even. So why don't we try out some negative numbers? Is even negative, 1? This should say, yep, negative 1 is not even, and we know it's not even, right? Because negative 1 or 1 in itself is an odd number. How about is even negative 8? Yep, negative 8 is even because when we divide negative 8 by 2, we get a remainder of 0.